Hey there, welcome to the College Investor Audio Show. It is so awesome that you're here today. Let's take a look at this new bill that would expand the definition of professional degrees. Very interesting topic. You want to dive deeper? You can always check us out at thecollegeinvestor.com, and you can like us and follow us and all the stuff on socials. You can find us just by searching for the College Investor. We're pretty much everywhere you are. Okay, let's take a look at this. Now, the Professional Student Degree Act, which was actually introduced by Republican Representative Mike Lawler and several other House Republicans, would expand the list of degrees considered professional under federal law. If this goes through, and this is why this is important, the change would allow students in dozens of graduate programs to borrow up to $200K in federal direct loans, which would double the cap that would otherwise apply here. The proposal comes amidst criticism from industry trade groups and students alike about the upcoming loan caps. Under last year's OBBBA, Grad Plus loans will be eliminated for new borrowers starting July 1st of 2026. In place of the uncapped borrowing for grad school, there will be new limits on grad direct loans. Those caps depend entirely on whether a program is classified as graduate or professional. So here's why the professional versus graduate definition matters. So graduate programs have always had this classification, but prior to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it was only used for statistical purposes. So beginning this year, 26, those definitions are being used to limit borrowing under the direct loan program. So grad students, master's, and most doctoral programs have a limit of $20,500 per year with a $100K lifetime limit, and professional students are $50,000 a year with a $200,000 lifetime limit. This is degrees like law and medical students. So the policy goal behind the change was to keep debt loads more closely aligned with earnings while preserving higher limits for degrees that typically lead to high-paying careers. But that approach really only works if the professional category stays narrow. A lot of degrees that feel professional in everyday language, like social work, physical therapy, public health, have instead been treated as standard graduate programs, subject to the lower $100,000 cap. This has led to criticism from both a labeling perspective and from a potential limitation for future students wanting to enter these fields. So here's what the Professional Student Degree Act would change. This act would change the professional category to expand it to things like social work, nursing, physical therapy, occupational therapy, physician's assistant programs, public health, business administration, MBA, accounting, architecture, education and special ed, and audiology. These new additions are on top of the ones that are already included, like law, medicine, pharmacy, dentistry, veterinary medicine, optometry, podiatric medicine, clinical psychology, chiropractic, theology or divinity, those types of things. The bill also gives the Secretary of Education authority to add any other degree that meets the broad criteria. So in practical terms, a student pursuing an MBA, MPH, MSW, or MED could gain access to an additional $100,000 in federal borrowing compared with current law. Now, pros and cons here. For students weighing grad school after 2026, the stakes are high. A student in a program classified as graduate would need to finance anything beyond $100K through savings, private loans, employer support, all that stuff. A student in a professional program could rely far more heavily on federal loans, which offer income-driven repayment plan, loan forgiveness options that private loans just don't. Supporters of the bill argue that many of the newly included programs are essential public service professions that require advanced training and carry rising tuition costs. Critics counter this and say that access to larger federal loans does not reduce the price of the education, and it may even encourage schools to raise it even more. I think I want to go the other way. Stop charging so much, for crying out loud. Earnings data underscore the problem, too. Programs currently treated as professional degrees tend to lead to substantially higher pay. Median earnings 5 years after grad school for these fields are roughly $134,000 a year, compared to about $75,000 for programs included under the proposed expansion, according to the American Enterprise Institute, which just wrecks your financial state after graduation. That gap matters because federal loan repayment ultimately depends on your income. Borrowing $200,000 may be manageable for like a physician or a dentist, but it could be financially challenging for a social worker or a teacher. Broader policy debate. Okay. Congress imposed grad loan limits in the first place to curb what lawmakers saw as a feedback loop. Unlimited borrowing allowed universities to raise tuition. Students took on debt they often just couldn't repay. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, has estimated that the new loan caps are going to save taxpayers $7 billion with a B per year by reducing loan forgiveness costs and defaults. Opponents of the Professional Student Degree Act argue that expanding the category to cover a large share of graduate programs is going to undo a whole lot of that progress. But by some estimates, the bill's definition could apply to roughly 70% of graduate student borrowers. Supporters respond that earnings vary widely within the fields and that loan caps should not be the sole tool for controlling graduate education costs. Okay. So what happens next? The bill faces an uncertain path. It has support from some lawmakers and higher education groups. It does run counter to the cost containment logic that drove last year's reforms in the first place. But for now, the existing definitions remain in place, and the end of Grad Plus loans in 2026 is still approaching. For students and families considering graduate school, the safest assumption is that borrowing will become more limited. That makes understanding program costs, future earnings, I want to bold and underline those two words, future earnings, ROI, and repayment options more important than ever. And if you want to understand all this stuff, oh my goodness, we have a ton of information for you to make sure you know everything you could possibly need to know. It's at thecollegeinvestor.com. Look at this article first, and then dive into all the resources, the links that are right inside this article. You can also ask any question about this. Follow us and like us and all the things on social media. Just search for The College Investor and you'll find us. Thanks so much for stopping by today, and we'll talk to you again real soon.